Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are continuing on with the cognitive unit, focusing in on memory. Yesterday, we talked about just kind of the sequential process of how we form memories. We talked a little bit about ways to strengthen and expand our working or short-term memory. We're going to kind of build on that today and talk about ways that we can expand, strengthen that, and then just kind of strengthen the memories we have for storage so it's a little bit easier to remember and retrieve them. So they're a bit stronger memories. So that's what we got talking about today. So there is a theory in the world of cognitive psychology called levels of processing theory. And it basically says that there's two ways that we process information. One involves more deep, meaningful processing of information that's going to create a more long lasting, durable memory. And then there's shallow processing, which is going to create not as strong of a memory. So, shallow processing involves kind of superficial, like studying and rehearsal of information. So we said rehearsal is just anything that you're using to try and get information into your memory. So kind of anything you're doing to try and remember something and like strengthen a memory. Shallow processing is using rehearsal, but it's just not as meaningful of a rehearsal. It's more just very surface level. So it could involve just looking at words on a page, reading things, looking at how to pronounce the words you're seeing, looking at how many letters it has, what colors things are. So you're just kind of looking at the surface level. So if you're trying to study something, you're just kind of looking at it surface level and not really engaging with it in a deep way. So let's say you're in your English class, right? Like how many times have you read something and it just kind of like went and you read it and you're like, oh, I didn't like take in any of this, right? That's kind of shallow processing. You're not really like engaging deeply with something. Whereas instead, deep processing is really trying to make meaning and connections and kind of gain a deeper processing of things. So this is, let's say, if you're looking at a list of words, it's like creating meaning for the word, connecting it to something you already know in your long-term memory, creating mental images, right? So if you're in English class, that's why they're asking you to do annotations and leave little comments and notes and like visualize and interact with the text. That's deep processing. Um, so going back to shallow processing, an example of shallow processing is what we did yesterday, which is maintenance rehearsal. So when you're trying to remember a phone number, PIN code, whatever it is, it's that just repeating it out loud a bunch of times. Again, this isn't ineffective, but it's not as effective as deep processing. So yeah, it might help us in the short term remember something, but if we're trying to talk about creating a meaningful, long-lasting memory, maintenance rehearsal probably isn't the best way to go about it, in that you're just repeating something. You're not really creating meaning or like significance for it. Now, for deep processing, what we can do is something called elaborative rehearsal. And that's what today's lesson is about, is talking about all these different elaborative rehearsal techniques that exist. So it is defined as facilitating the formation of memory by linking new information to what we already know. So connecting to previously held memories and things in our system, which connects to me having a method for my madness and what I make you do with the vocab packets. I know sometimes you moan and groan about having to do that third column in the vocab packet where you have to make a connection to your own life. But psychologically, this is proven to be a form of elaborative rehearsal, which is a form of deep processing. Um, the more you can connect new things to things that are already in your memory system is going to help you create a more deeper memory that's stronger, more durable. So that's why I got here mnemonic devices are just one of many examples of effortful or elaborative rehearsal strategies. So right when I tell you Gary the snail with a hydro flask, you're gonna be like, oh, that's a cochlea. Or when I say you'll never forget a hippo on East Campus, right? That is a mnemonic device. You're kind of visualizing, you're creating that mental image, connecting it to things that you already know. So that's going to help you remember the definition of hippocampus or the definition of the cochlea. So again, I have a method to my madness. I don't just make you do this because I want to torture you. you connecting this to stuff you already know is proven psychologically to help create a more durable memory than just you memorizing definitions. So here's some forms of effortful processing strategies or elaborative rehearsal that we discuss. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday. Chunking is the organization of pieces of information into smaller, more meaningful units. So the example of phone numbers, we said that 10 numbers is pushing it in terms of what we can remember for short-term memory because the magic number is 7 plus or minus 2. So we chunk. We divide it up. This is the school's phone number, I think. So we go 262 dash 560 dash 3100. And again, that's going to allow you to expand that and make it more meaningful if you're chunking it into smaller pieces of information. Along with chunking also comes categorization. So if you're giving a list of items that are random, kind of like we did for that short-term memory test yesterday, if you can group it and be like, oh, these are fruits, these are articles of clothing, these are this, right? If you're able to like group things and chunk them in that way, that also helps. So just chunking big things into smaller, more manageable pieces that have meaning often with them is going to help you remember them better. Then mnemonics, like I said, it is making connections between new material and information already in your long-term memory. So that's why anytime you can make those mnemonic devices, and I did all of those for the brain unit, right? I said like angry Amy. The thalamus is the elf example of the mail room, right? I'm connecting it to things that you guys already know that are more tangible. And then hierarchies. So this is what I do in my concept maps all the time. And this graphic organizer is a form of this. So it's it's a type of chunking that involves dividing broad categories into lesser concepts and categories, right? So creating those hierarchies. And that's what I'm doing here, right? Big categories, effortful processing strategies. These are the subcategories, right? OMG, here is another hierarchy, right? And again, this helps us remember it better than just seeing a bunch of words on a page without like a way of organizing it. So again, effortful processing strategies for encoding information into your memory system. These are just, again, ways to strengthen the encoding of memories into storage so they're stronger and a little bit easier to retrieve, hopefully. So, like I said, here's the big picture. Deep processing, elaborative rehearsal is a form of this. And all of these are examples. We're going to talk about the self-reference effect another day, but it's basically saying that when you can connect things to yourself, you're better able to remember it. So, for example, if you're trying to remember, like, I know Meryl Streep's birthday is June 22nd because my birthday is June 22nd. So when you tie like random information, but you're able to connect it to yourself, you'll be better able to remember it. But these are all forms of those things that help us strengthen the encoding of memories so they're easier to retrieve and stronger. Okay. So here's a great example, though, of chunking. So if I give this out in class, but one group will get this list, one group will get this. It's the same amount of terms, but we see that one is grouped into meaningful categories of like, okay, here are fruits, here's flowers, here are tools, etc. Whereas this one's just the same thing, but all over the place. Of course, people are going to remember this one better and have a way better time writing down all of these because they're grouped into meaningful things. They went chunking. Right? And here's a great example of chunking is those people who remember pie. They chunk those into like dates and weird things that they can remember. They also use other forms of elaborative rehearsal and things like creating visualizations. They're going to like kind of use it to tell a story and like visualize it. Pretty interesting. There's a good video on this. Okay. And then finally, here's some other study techniques that use kind of what we've just talked about. So there's things called distributed practice techniques. Distributed practice is just the idea of spacing out your testing so you're not cramming. It's literally the opposite of cramming. You're distributing it throughout a long period of time rather than cramming. So another term for this is called the spacing effect. So it's spacing out your studying over time rather than clumping it all together. Literally the opposite of cramming. So spacing effect says that if you do your Quizlet and do your vocab packet every night rather than save it for the end, that's kind of a form of chunking, right? And that you're like chunking information into small groups rather than putting it all into one big thing. So creating like a little weekly study table or schedule is good for you. Now, one more term to note is called the testing effect. And this is a really good study technique too. And it's the idea that we remember better when we have to retrieve information from our long term memory rather than just rereading it. So if you're trying to study for a test rather than just rereading your notes, it's better for you to quiz yourself because quizzing yourself forces you to pull that information from your long term memory. And obviously, the more time you're pulling things from your long term memory, like the easier it's going to be to access. Um, so rather than just rereading your notes, doing a Quizlet, doing flashcards, quizzing yourself with a friend is a good example, or doing the review packet without looking at the answer key first, all good examples of the testing effect because it's forcing you to take that stuff out of long-term memory, bring it up, and the more you do that, obviously the easier and more accessible it'll be. So we're going to end today by talking about important structures in the brain in terms of memory. We mentioned yesterday hippocampus, it processes explicit memories, so your semantic and episodic memories of facts and events. But this isn't where memories are stored. And now it's important to also go back to that idea of left and right hemisphere. So the left part of the hippocampus will be more visual or verbal and language memories, and then the right is going to be more visual memories and things of location. So kind of interesting there. Now, one last thing I'll end with is infantile amnesia. You can think about you don't remember things before you were about like 2 or 3 or so. And the reason for this is because of something called infantile amnesia. It's actually the idea that we have too many neurons, and it's actually kind of clouding our ability to like access those memories during that time when we have like too many neurons that are all over the place that aren't like used for a job yet. And if you think about your hippocampus is still developing, it's like a combination that you're not going to be able to remember things. So finally ending by talking about the biological structure, so parts of the brain involved in memory. We said hippocampus is for your explicit memories. Cerebellum is for implicit memories, which makes sense considering the cerebellum is for movement. So it helps with those procedural motor skills that are automatic. Basal ganglia is also a structure that we haven't really talked about. It's a small one, but it also aids in helping with procedural motor skills. The amygdala, like I said, is close. It's in the limbic system along with the hippocampus. And the amygdala, of course, processes fear. So the amygdala helps in forming emotions connected to strong emotional responses, often tied in with like really fearful things. So we're going to talk about the term flashbulb memory, which are really vivid vivid memories of emotional experiences. So the amygdala helps with those. And then finally, the frontal lobes actually have a role in memory, and they help with working memory processing. The left would be like holding passwords and stuff in your working memory because that's like numbers and stuff. And then the right would be more visual things. So there we go. That is all for you today. Have a nice day.